Go for it.
On the authority of Abu Ya'la Shaddad bin Aus, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, verily Allah has prescribed ihsan in all things. Thus if you kill, kill well. If you slaughter, slaughter well. Let each one of you sharpen his blade and let him spare suffering to the animal.
Not exact translation. They kind of went with the meaning, but it's okay. The narrator of the hadith is Abu Ya'la. That's his kunya. His name is Shaddad ibn Aus al-Khazraji al-Ansari. So he's from the Khazraj of the Ansar. The Ansar are the people of Medina. Right? Before, it's called what? What's the name before? Yathrib. And they become Muslim. They accept the Prophet ﷺ. They're called the Ansar, which means the people who do what? Who do what? They're called the Ansar when they become Muslim. They're made up of two main tribes, Al-Aus and Al-Khazraj. They've been warring for generations. They accept Islam and accept the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims. And the name Yathrib is changed to Medina. And the Aus and the Khazraj together, these two tribes are given the name the Ansar, which means the helpers, the supporters. Right? Because they came to the support in this crucial time. So this is who he is. He accepts Islam around 17 years old. He's around 17 years old when the Prophet ﷺ comes to Medina and he accepts Islam. His father, Aus ibn Thabit, participated in the Battle of Badr, and he was martyred at the Battle of Uhud. And his uncle is Hassan ibn Thabit. The brother of Aus was Hassan. Who's Hassan ibn Thabit? The Prophet ﷺ's what? Hassan ibn Thabit was his what? His what? No. He's from the Ansar, so the people of Medina. Remember we said we covered the information about the narrators because it gives insight to the narration almost always. And it is important to know where is this information coming from, who are these people, right? Why are these people special, what gives them the merit. So it's not necessarily a biography, not that there's much about Shaddad except what we're saying, but it's important to know that, so that these are not just names. So like what we said, that Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, is the Prophet ﷺ's what? He was his servant. He was his servant. He was his servant for those 10 years. So now we come to Hassan ibn Thabit, who's the uncle of Shaddad ibn Aus, who's telling us this hadith, and he's the Prophet ﷺ's poet. He was the Prophet ﷺ's poet who would write poetry on his behalf, which was a very, very significant tool and job in that time. He was known particularly for his worship and his knowledge. Ubadah ibn Samit, radiallahu anhu, another companion, he said, كَانَ شَدَّاد مِمَّنْ أُوتِيَ الْعِلْمُ وَالْحِلْمِ. Shaddad was one of the people who were given knowledge and forbearance and patience, excellent character. Abu Darda said that he praised his fiqh, his understanding of the religion, that he has a very, very high standard, very, very high understanding of the deen. They described him as, they described his countenance, his demeanor, بِبَيَانٍ إِذَا نَطَقْ وَبِقَضْمٍ إِذَا غَضَبْ. He is, how do you describe him? He is eloquent when he speaks, and when he is angry, you'll see him suppress it. He doesn't manifest his anger. He keeps it in, he just does something else. He's not someone who you'll see him get angry publicly. The Prophet ﷺ told him one of the most famous narrations. He doesn't have a lot of narrations of hadith. He narrated around 50. But one of the most famous ones that he has narrated is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told him, يَا شَدَّادَ ibn Aus, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ النَّاسِ قَدْ أَكْنَزُوا الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ فَأَكْنِزْ هَؤُلَاءِ الْكَلِمَاتِ اللهم إني أسألك الثبات في الأمر والعزيمة على الرشد وأسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك وأسألك شكر نعمتك وحسن عبادتك وأسألك قلبا سليما ولسانا صادقا وأسألك من خير ما تعلم وأعوذ بك من شر ما تعلم وأستغفرك لما تعلم إنك أنت علام الغيوب. Such a beautiful dua that everybody should memorize. One of the most famous narrations of Shaddad ibn Aus, the Prophet ﷺ told him, O Shaddad, if you see people hoarding gold and silver, when you see people going nuts over gold and silver and trying to have as much as possible, save as much as possible, you hoard these words. The imagery here is people are protective over it. They want more. They're trying to get as much as possible. He's saying you're going to see them do that left and right. When you see them do that, how should you react? Be like that, but with these words. Not with the gold and silver, not with the materialism that they are chasing. Be protective and constantly revisit these words the way that people hoard gold and silver. What were those words that he taught him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The dua is, O Allah, I ask you for steadfastness upon this matter. And I ask you for determination upon guidance. And I ask you for the paths to your mercy and the things that mandate your forgiveness. And I ask you to be grateful for the blessings you have given me, and to beautify and perfect my worship of you. And I ask you for a sound, pure heart and a truthful tongue. And I ask you from the good that only you know. And I seek refuge in you from the evil that you know. And I seek forgiveness in you for what you know, meaning about me that I have done. Indeed, you are the one who knows all that is unseen. It's a very nice dua. I encourage you all to look it up. Look up Shaddad ibn Aus, the dua of Shaddad ibn Aus, and it will come up. The Prophet ﷺ taught him it. It covers everything. Everything that you're thinking about, everything that you're worried about. Just in that one sentence, oh Allah, I ask you in the good that you know, and I seek refuge in you from the evil that you know. I'm going in blind here without you, oh Allah. Right? It's a very, very beautiful dua. Yes, Adam? If you search اللهم إني أسألك الثبات في الأمر, it'll come up. الثبات في الأمر, steadfastness in my affair or in this deen. If you just search the dua of Shaddad ibn Aus, it'll come up because he doesn't have a lot of hadith that he narrated, like I said. And this is the most famous of them. In another hadith, he was with the Prophet ﷺ and he was very distressed. He was down on his luck. And I love these narrations because they show us that Sahaba are human beings. That there's times where they're worshipping and they're going all out and they're out in jihad and they're sacrificing their lives or they're sacrificing all their wealth one shot. They're staying up in prayer all night long. And you start to think these people are human beings. Then when you come across a narration like this, you realize, no, they're just like you and me. Maybe not just like you and me, but they have the same exact challenges. They just overcame. They persevered. They consistently worked against it. They didn't let it get to them, this worldly life and its temptations, but they still faced them. So he's sitting there with the Prophet ﷺ and he's distressed. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, Malaka ya Shaddad, what's wrong with you? And he says, Daqat bi ad-dunya. He doesn't say like, oh, I'm distressed about the hereafter. It's a worldly matter. He says this world has become constricted. Right? Bills and dues and things I have to do, this world has become very constricted upon me. I don't have a lot of means or I'm struggling. Right? He's distressed over his worldly affair. We know how much they went hungry, how much they struggled to make ends meet at times. So there are people too. So he's saying that's why I'm so distressed. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, Laysa alayk, don't worry about it. Inna Sham sayuftah. The Asham, Greater Syria, this area, will soon be conquered, will soon be Muslim lands, will be liberated. وَبَيْتُ الْمَقْدِسِ سَيُفْتَحْ, and Jerusalem will be liberated, will be conquered. وَتَكُونْ أَنْتَ وَوَلَدَكَ مِنْ بَعْدِكَ أَئِمَّةٌ فِيهِمْ, and soon you and your children after them, your descendants, will be leaders amongst these people. Saying soon Greater Syria will be conquered, will be Muslim lands, and specifically Jerusalem, and you and your children will be leaders in that land. SubhanAllah. The Prophet ﷺ in this context is where, surrounded in Medina, they have all the Arabs allied against them. Who runs Jerusalem right now? It's the Roman Empire, right? A world superpower. So it's such a mind-boggling prediction, prophecy, but as we'll see, it will come to pass. He participated in the Battle of Yarmouk and then was appointed as the governor of Hims by Umar ibn al-Khattab. After the assassination of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, he left public life. He stepped down from any type of position and left public life and stuck to just worship. So I don't have anything to do with this anymore. It's taken a very dark turn, as we've seen with many companions. They chose this path, those who were alive at the time. And he stuck to worship, and he would just worship diligently, non-stop, till the end of his life. When he was described as when he came to sleep, he was like oil in a frying pan. What does oil in the frying pan do? Burns? Could burn, that's true. It pops. Yeah, that's what I was going for. It's okay. It's not really an image that comes immediately to mind. But yeah, it pops up. So he's saying that he wouldn't stay long on his side. And he's like an insomniac. It wasn't necessarily because of he's just struggling to sleep. So he would get up and he would say, Allahumma inna an-nar qad halat bayni wa bayna an-nawm. Oh Allah, what's keeping me up is the remembrance of the fire. It's stopping me from sleep. So instead I'm just going to get up and pray. What's the point of keep trying, keep struggling? And maybe this is a tip that we could take home with us, that at times when we struggle to get up and down, to get asleep, you get up, pray a few rak'at and the shaitan will put you right to sleep. Watch, he'll be like, no, never mind. Let me sing you a lullaby. But this isn't what he was doing. He wasn't trying to go back to sleep. He's like, he wouldn't be able to sleep and he would tell himself, oh Allah, it's the fire that's keeping me awake. So instead of trying to sleep, I'm going to save myself from it, and he would pray until the morning. When Jerusalem was conquered, he took his entire family and moved there, as the Prophet ﷺ told him and prophesied, and he spent the rest of his life there, and he was buried there in the year 64 after the Hijrah at 75 years old. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. Okay, so come to the hadith now. Inna Allah kataba al-ihsan ala kulli shay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kataba, he wrote ihsan on everything. So, what does the word kataba make you think of? Okay, I already said that, so it's not makes you think of. I told you that. What else? What's the implication? Not the literal translation. Command. This is important. Oh, same notes from last week. You guys practicing on controlling your anger? How many people flipped out this week? Raise your hands if you flipped out. I'm not going to look, but you should be ashamed of yourself. I don't think I flipped out this week, but I'm not sure. So the word kataba means to write. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote ihsan over everything, the first meaning of kataba is to ordain, to decree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for example, كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَأَغْلَبَنَّ أَنَا وَرُسُلِي. Allah has written that I will be victorious, me and my messengers. This means ordained. It's a decree. It's going to happen. Doesn't matter what it looks like, doesn't matter how long it takes, doesn't matter who believes or who doesn't, who tries to help or who tries to stop. It's going to happen. Allah will be victorious, him and his messengers. Inna Allah qawiyyun aziz. Allah is the most mighty and the almighty. So this is one meaning of the word kataba. Also the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith, كُتِبَ عَلَى ابْنِ آدَمْ حَظُّهُ مِنَ الزِّنَا لَا مَحَالَةً. It has been ordained upon every son of Adam, every human being, their share of zina. There's no way out. Does that mean everyone's going to commit zina? That's what Sahaba asked. They said, what does this mean? It means all of us have to commit zina? And he said, no, not zina proper, but the zina of the eyes is to look and so on and so forth. Every body part has its own form of zina. And then he says the privates either apply that, they either take it to fruition or they deny it. So if the person looks, for example, and gets enticed, it's their job to stop looking, right? Control their desire. And if it's left unchecked, it could lead to actual zina proper, wal-'iyadhu billah. But he's saying this, the point of this hadith is that it's bound to happen. You're bound to look at something you're not supposed to look at, to engage in a way that's a little bit less than appropriate. It's your job to reel back. But the point is, it's bound to happen. The word kataba means ordained. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I will be victorious, me and my messenger. So that's ordained, meaning made a decree. Number two is obligated, as Adam said. How do we know? Examples where kataba means obligation. I'll put this here. Hopefully it's not in anyone's way. Shouldn't be. How do you know kataba means obligation, Adam? You just guessing? It's no penalty, man. It's a very, very low stakes. I know I'm asking aggressively. That's just how I talk. How do you know kataba means obligated? Anybody? Go ahead, Sierra. So that would be more with ordained. It could work both ways. He obligated himself with mercy. كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. There's a little bit more direct. Yusuf? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ. It has been ordained or written upon you, prescribed for you fasting, meaning obligated. You have to. كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, just like it was for people before you. Anything else? إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. Salah has been ordained upon the believers, written, prescribed as an order, meaning an obligation. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ. When jihad was made obligatory upon them or prescribed for them. Before that it was what? كُفُّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ. It's forbidden. Self-defense was forbidden. So in Mecca, up for the first 14 years of revelation, 13 in Mecca and the first year in Medina, they could not bear arms. You had no opportunity even for self-defense. You just take it. كُفُّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ. Hold your hands back was the command. Then it came كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ. Jihad has been ordained for you in self-defense and repelling evil. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in hadith, أُمِرْتُ بِالسِّوَاكِ حَتَّى خَشِيتُ أَن يُكْتَبْ عَلَيْهِ. I was commanded with siwak, the toothbrush, to do siwak all the time, miswak, until I was afraid that it was going to be kutiba alay, written upon me, meaning an obligation, that you guys have to do siwak at this time or that time. So this is an example of kataba meaning obligated. So besides that, we have another command in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَحْسِنُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Show ihsan. We've described ihsan at length now. It means excellence, it means perfection, it means beauty, it means the absolute best that you can do. It means completion. It has meanings in all of these adjectives. So or in all of these nouns. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَأَحْسِنُوا, be people of ihsan, show excellence, be excellent, for indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who show excellence. So here we have the command, Allah's commanding, وَأَحْسِنُوا. And this is something that you will take in fiqh if you study fiqh, which is al-amru al-mujarrad yaqtadi al-wujub. A plain command equals fard. So ahsinu, is that a command? It is. Allah says, show ihsan. So it's plain. There's nothing with it. There's no, for example, he said in another hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ تَعَجَّلَ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. Whoever in the Hajj, whoever decides to stay behind these extra days, so there's certain days in Hajj, some of them are obligatory and some of them are extra. Whoever stays here or goes, فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ, there's no sin on them. And the verses just before that were saying, this is where you need to go, this is where you need to do. So this is like a asterisk that comes later saying, here's some conditions where you're allowed a leeway, for example. So there's commands that were given before, here's how you do Hajj, go here, do that. And then later, in this part of the command, there's leeway for you to choose. Because Allah said, "What فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ." But that has to come afterwards, either in an ayah or hadith, where the command is now being lightened by this conditional statement. Where the Prophet ﷺ says, for example, do this, so that's a command. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do this, and then maybe later it says, if you want. Then now we know it's not an obligation because of that if you want. I'm struggling to think of an example right here now, but maybe you guys could think of them while you consider it. A hadith or ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do this, and then there's a condition afterwards, meaning if you want or only if this happens. So that means the obligation is stipulated upon the condition. So it's not an obligation because of that condition. You get what I'm saying? Does it make sense? So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is no conditions. He doesn't say, do ihsan, and then something else, if you can, or if, obviously if you can is a given, if you have the ability to, but only in this situation or that, there's no qualifying statement afterwards. It just says, do ihsan. Allah loves those who do ihsan. So a plain commandment like that, like وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, establish the prayer. There's no condition after it. There's no qualifying statement that comes afterwards and says only for these people or only in this situation. It's an open command. So any open command that's plain like that, it denotes obligation. That's something that's a concept, it's a principle in fiqh. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam command something, a plain commandment with no stipulations, with no conditions, with no asterisks afterwards, with no qualifying statements to show it's only for these people or that people, it's a general commandment for everybody and it's an obligation. So, and it's even more direct in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. Allah commands with justice and ihsan. So they're commandments, means command is an obligation. He says, وَأَنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ وَأَحْسِنُوا. That's the same verse. We'll get to it, the story behind it. Yes, Yusuf? Or Am?
Yeah, so would it also be, it's part of if it's said to the masses versus if it was said to one person? So for example, the man who came into the masjid and he didn't pray the Hayat al-Masjid and he told him to pray at the masjid.
Yes.
Is that, that's sunnah, right? So then, it was only said to one person, so how do we?
So that's another concept in usul al-fiqh as well, which is if one person is being commanded or a group or a man or a woman, unless there's a qualifying statement or a stipulation afterwards, it belongs to everybody. You get it?
So then the Hayat al-Masjid is fard?
So according to that hadith, if you take it by itself, because he commanded him, some scholars had the opinion, yes. But then there's other evidences that would come to play that would be stipulations, that would be showing that it's not. For example, in one hadith where he says that the only thing Allah obligated are these 5 daily prayers. So they'll use that hadith to say, yes, he commanded it here, so it is a command. So at face value, it's an obligation to pray Tahiyat al-Masjid. The man came in, he sat down, Prophet ﷺ commanded him to get up and pray. That's a command. In that hadith, it's mujarrad, it's plain, there's no stipulations. He didn't say, I'm only commanding you because I want you to do more good deeds. It's just an empty command. He didn't say any indications of any direction. So based on that, some scholars would say that it is a fard, but then other evidence would bring it down. That's the whole point. So other evidence is what brings it down to the level of preferred and not obligatory. But an open command, and that's understood. If I say, give me a cup of water, and you just sit there and say, well, I thought it was just a suggestion, it wouldn't make sense, especially if it's from higher up to lower, right? Your parent or a manager or something, let alone Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. So these are commandments that show, that are evidence the scholars have used to say ihsan is fard. Ihsan, remember when we spoke about ihsan, the levels of faith? That top one is fard. But we're not done yet, we're going to get there, so don't freak out just yet. You can freak out later. This verse that we just shared where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنْفِقُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ وَأَحْسِنُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Spend in the way of Allah and do not throw yourselves into destruction using your own hands. Don't destroy yourselves. And show ihsan, be excellent, because Allah loves those who show excellence. Allah loves those who show ihsan. This ayah has a very interesting story behind it. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, rahmahullah, radiallahu anhu, he says that we were in a expedition that went all the way to Constantinople. Right, where's Constantinople? Modern day Istanbul, but back then when it was called Constantinople, that's the capital of the Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, its capital. Right, the capital of the world superpower. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari is there at the gates with the Muslim army under the Khilafah of Muawiyah. Do you fathom how insane that is? Like, just take a second to understand that sentence. And you can't really understand it till you go over the seerah and you learn a lot more about the Sahaba and just the beginning of the general seerah. Beginning particularly, but all the way till the end, you got to read it. Where you see how difficult it was for them to be Muslim, how ostracized they were by the whole Arabian Peninsula, how few they felt all the time, and they were, how little supplies that they had, how they went to the Prophet ﷺ, for example, and he was laying down at the Kaaba and they told him, make dua, we're going to stay here forever being tortured and being killed, just tens of us in Mecca. Is this how it's going to end? And the Prophet ﷺ said, you're in a rush, Allah will bring fruition to this deen. And some believed, some didn't. Even the Sahaba who believed, many of them died along the way and didn't see anything. And then now one of them who was there, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who saw the Prophet ﷺ, interacted with him in 15 or 20 years after his death, ﷺ, or actually a little bit more, 30 years after his death, ﷺ, he's knocking on the gates of the top superpower of the world. So you can see the prophecy of Rasulullah ﷺ came true in their very lives. He's here with a group of people at the gates of a world superpower. In fact, he's one of the people who was buried there. And he came all the way from Medina. In his lifetime, when he was younger, life was about one thing: Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj fighting each other. That's it. That's all that mattered. That was literally all of life. We hate Al-Aws, and Al-Aws hates us. Everything in our life has to do about getting one on Al-Aws or getting one on Al-Khazraj. That was their entire existence, literally. For generations. Like one generation dies, they hand off the baton to the next one to do the same nonsense. And then these very people, Aws and Khazraj, are standing side by side at the gates of Constantinople. It's really mind-boggling when you think about it. So he says, when we were like this, one of the Muhajirin, the people from Mecca, original Muslims from Mecca, is not named in the story, he jumps over the enemy lines and he fights until he is killed on his own. He charges forward and he fights until he's killed. So the people in the army, they said, he has thrown himself by his own hands into destruction. Allah says not to do that in the Quran. He killed himself. That's what they're saying, and Allah, that's not a good thing. So Abu Ayyub says that is not why that verse was revealed. You guys don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't apply to what he just did. Right? There's a show of bravery, increases morale. He could have actually accomplished a task or something. It's not the same as someone willingly killing themselves. And besides, he says that's not what this verse was revealed at all. So they said, why was it revealed? He said it was revealed about us, the Ansar. Because we were with the Messenger of Allah ﷺ for years, for almost 10 years, struggling with him in Medina, starving, staying by his side. And in that time, we were giving it our all. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him victory. Fashal Islam wa dhahar. Islam became apparent and all over. That's it. Conquest of Mecca, the whole Arabian Peninsula is now conforming to Islam more or less. So he says, when that happened, اجتمعنا معشر الأنصار نجية. We had a secret gathering, a small gathering between us, the Ansar, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, these two tribes who accepted the Muslims in Medina. And they said, قد أكرمنا الله بصحبة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم ونصره حتى فشل الإسلام وكثر أهله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us, honored us by being the companions of His Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and giving him aid and victory. And now Islam is all over, and Muslims are all over. وَكُنَّا قَدْ أَثَّرْنَاهُ عَلَى الْأَهْلَيْنِ وَالْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. And we have, up until this point, we preferred the Messenger of Allah and Islam and everything it taught us over our families and our wealth and our children, our farms, everything we've neglected up until now. When Islam came, when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, we gave it our all. And everything got neglected. Our businesses, our families, our homes, the things that we were building up, the worldly things that we used to be so invested in. And then now that he's victorious, maybe we can go back and give these things a little bit more attention. Maybe we can go back and start focusing on our farms a little bit more, our businesses, our families, because it's safe. There's no more a need for us, particularly when there's so many other Muslims. And Islam will build through this society that has existed, that has come to exist now by the da'wah and the sacrifice that we've done. This is their conclusion. They have a secret gathering and that's what they conclude. He said, when we concluded that, Allah revealed this verse. Spend in the way of Allah and do not throw yourselves by your own hands into destruction. You're going to destroy yourselves. Because they understood that it has crescendoed into this peak, this climax. It'll keep going now. We can go somewhere else. Their idea at that point, or their conclusion at that point was, it has increased in intensity and heat. It's like a fire that you've built, and it's good enough now where you can just keep throwing things in it and it dies down slowly. That's like kind of the trajectory that they were saying. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that's not how it works. You give it your all until it becomes the biggest and the brightest it can be, and that's the last moment. It doesn't die down. Your faith, your journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not this. It shouldn't be this. Or even this. It plateaus. It's this. It's exponential. And you die here. You die at the very peak. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them. He's telling them, don't do that, because after all you've done, all you've sacrificed, all you invested, that would be destroying everything. To go back to this worldly life, after you've been working to the hereafter in the most epic fashion and gaining all this preference from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that wouldn't make sense. And have ihsan. Do your absolute best. Live with excellence to the very last moment. Don't change trajectory. Just because the promise has come true and the victory is here and everything has worked out and Islam is safe and the Prophet ﷺ is safe and Islam is continuing, don't change trajectory. You just keep going. There's still more to do. So it's very interesting because it's not the same way that people use this verse, even though that usage is fine, where people don't hurt yourself, don't destroy yourself. That meaning is obviously Islamic and there, but the verse was actually revealed that this self-destruction that was being condemned was leaving the deen, giving it, and they're not going to become kafir, but they're going to give it less than they used to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that would be destroying yourself. That's not ihsan. So back to our original discussion about kataba. Is ihsan wajib? Is it obligatory to have ihsan? So Allah used the word kataba, and we've seen that it means pretty much obligation. He used the plain commandment, which means obligation as well. So is ihsan wajib, is the question. Must you have ihsan? What is ihsan? We defined it already, right? What is it? Perfection, excellence. Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said, you worship Allah as if you could see Him. If you don't see Him, then He sees you. You're aware of that fact. Is that an obligation? What do you guys think? Yeah, Muayyad? Okay, good. So we're going to use perfection, excellence, all as placeholders for ihsan, because we don't write out mean perfection, because we know no one's perfect. But striving for perfection will make you excellent. So ihsan means all of these things at once. So good. You mentioned one thing we'll get to. Go ahead, Am.
I don't know if it's obligatory, because I remember when you did the triangle, where it was Islam, and then you went and ihsan, and ihsan.
It was a house, not a triangle. Okay, I'm not the best artist. I know.
It was the goal to get to, and that's what you should be striving for, but not everyone gets there. So if it's obligatory, that means you're sinning if you're not doing it, right? So would you be sinful if you're still not in there, as long as you're doing the basics of Islam?
So you might have a very similar answer. It goes together, and you're right. You're on the right track. Any other input? Go ahead, sister. Mm-hmm. So doing it the right way, but I could do it the right way, but the bare minimum. Right? I could do the bare minimum. That's not ihsan. But I'm asking, is it fard? Am I sinful if I don't strive for a level higher? Because according to this hadith, it seems like it. Allah has ordained ihsan on everything, or in everything, as we'll explore in a minute. So it seems like it's a command. We see other places where ihsan is commanded with. Does that mean excellence is the bare minimum of Islam? So you said no, Yusuf.
Yeah.
Why?
Because the bare minimum is to be a Muslim. So I think that ihsan is just like for the people who want higher level of Jannah. So
That's the whole debate. Is ihsan only for higher level of Jannah or is it an obligation? Here it seems like it's being an obligation. So you're saying no, there's a bare minimum and ihsan is above that. Okay, good. So that's like what the common understanding is and what we actually explored in previous hadith. Now we're trying to explore, is it possible that, no, it is an obligation according to this hadith. Yeah.
There's another hadith that's where the
Now you're thinking of the system, right? You're like, wait a second, I know how it works.
on the cheat code. So
Okay.
basically, there's another hadith where a Badawy man comes to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He asks him, what do I need to do just to get to Jannah? And he tells him the five pillars. And then another Sahaba around him said, why just that? And he said, that's enough for him to get to Jannah.
Okay, so you're on the right track, and by the way, you said it's like a cheat code. That you know how true that statement is. When you study fiqh or usul fiqh, it is a cheat code for understanding Islam because you see everything in tandem altogether. You see the relationship. So definitely, anyone who has time for any level of that, do as much of that as possible. Islam only becomes clearer, easier, more comfortable, and more enjoyable. May Allah subhanahu wa taala increase your own knowledge. I mean, yes, Ismail.
It seems like an obligation for religious acts.
Your first idea was a little bit more in line, because in the end of the day, everything has an intention. The worldly things, if they're just purely worldly, then it doesn't really come into our discussion. If someone does something of this worldly life of eating, drinking, earning, and they intend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with it, it becomes worship. So that overlap is not really useful for us here, because in the end of the day, if it's something that is unintended, that's what the first hadith talks about, it will not be rewarded. So you guys are all on the right track. If we could join all your ideas together, that'd be weird. But the answer is, two things about ihsan are obligatory. One is the general ihsan, as a lifestyle. Is that my child? Doesn't sound like it. Could be though, it's not always easy to tell. You could always tell actually, that's the whole point, but given time, there's interesting tafsir of an ayah about that, but that's going to be too long of a tangent we don't have time for. So focus, guys. Stop asking unrelated questions, please. So general ihsan is number one, and then a certain level of ihsan in everything. This is the obligatory level of ihsan. So ihsan is an obligation. It is fard. You could be sinful for leaving it off. But in these two senses, number one, these two angles, is ihsan as a general lifestyle. Trying your best. That's what ihsan means from one angle. Like we said, all these things come to play: perfection, excellence, beauty, and it means all these things at once. The most important of them that is obligatory upon you is to try your best. To not be half-hearted and lazy in your journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want you to consider the idea of someone who goes for the bare minimum. If passing is a 65 and I calculate the exact amount of effort that I need for a 65, what's the most likely outcome? Might be a 60, right? Just something happened. You're a little bit sleepy today, or that one question that you missed. So when you plan for the bare minimum, you most likely don't hit it. So the ihsan attitude, and both of these things are connected, by the way. So the ihsan outlook or paradigm is necessary so you don't hit bare minimum. Because if you have bare minimum, even though the hadith is true that you mentioned, where he told that companion, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the 5 pillars of Islam, and he said, I'm not going to do anything else. And he added to it, like, you hold halal, what Allah tells you is halal and haram. So there's a little bit more than the 5 pillars there, but they're all obligations. And that companion responded, I'm going to do nothing besides what you just said. And he left. And the Sahaba were just like, what kind of attitude is that? And the Prophet ﷺ did say, leave him. It's okay. Because if he does that, he's good. He'll go to Jannah. He'll be successful. That is what Allah obligated you with. So while that is the bare minimum obligation, you're not commanded to go above that. If your attitude towards that bare minimum is the bare minimum, you most likely won't make it. So without a general ihsan paradigm of your life, of how you interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and approach worship and fard and haram, you most likely won't even hit the bare minimum. And that's the problem. So that level of ihsan is obligatory. And I think it'd be a relatively low level, right? Because all you need to do is perfect or show excellence in the bare minimum though. So you're not necessarily not yet required to do anything extra, that's sunnah, but be excellent and have an excellent mindset in that you're not going to be satisfied with anything but trying your very best. The ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about Qarun and how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him and his people, they respond to him, they say, when they see his arrogance and his greed, they say, وَأَحْسِن كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ. Show excellence the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown you excellence. Like, look at what you have. That's all it takes. Imagine if Allah gave you the bare minimum. What's the bare minimum you need to live? How much food and how much water and how much shelter? We could live off a lot less than we do, right? We could live in a box. I don't know. Alright, Yusuf could live in a box. I can't live in a box, huh? You're right, bare minimum. Imagine if Allah gave us all the absolute bare minimum of everything. Is that the case? Or He has given us وَأَسْبَغَ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعَمَهُ ظَاهِرَةً وَبَاطِنًا. He has poured His blessings upon you, apparent and hidden, like some of you don't even notice, you take for granted. Imagine if Allah dealt with us in the bare minimum. What would that look like in this world, then the hereafter? Imagine if I lived a lifetime of bare minimum giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is by the minute, by the dollar, by the rak'ah, by the second of my attention. And then I stand before Him and I say, show me grace. Forgive me. Overlook these things. Is that what I expect, or is it going to be, as the Prophet said, whoever is asked, that's a form of torment. It's a form of torment to even be asked on the Day of Judgment. Like, here's the things that you did, why? Even if there's no punishment. Even if there's no adhab in the hellfire. Just being told, why did you do that? He said, that's enough of a punishment to stand in front of our Creator and be asked. I thought everyone was going to be asked. No? Some people, their judgment is simply, the best judgment the Prophet told us, al-hisab al-yasir. When Aisha radiallahu anha asked him, what does that look like? He said, the person will be given their scroll. They see the deeds and they're told, keep going. That's it. Just look at what you've done. Just see it. And that would be the easiest of accounts. Besides the people who skip it entirely because they don't even have an account. But the easiest of people who are taken into account to stand in front of Allah, they're just shown their deeds. They read them one glance and they keep going. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala write for us an easy account. So how do we interact with Allah and what do we expect? That should be dripping with ihsan. It shouldn't be a bare minimum because that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does with us. Another meaning of إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ الْإِحْسَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ is إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ الْإِحْسَانَ فِي كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Here the word in this other meaning, which is they're both, they work together, they're not contradictory, is that ala here is in place of fi. So not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding ihsan as an obligation upon everything, meaning all sentient beings, all humans and jinn must do ihsan, but you must have ihsan in everything that you do, which is closer to what you were mentioning, sister, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves إِذَا عَمِلَ أَحَدُكُمْ عَمَلًا فَلْيُتْقِنَهُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that when one of you does an action, he fulfills it to the best possible manner. He does it with competence. He does it with completion. This is that other meaning here now. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't ordain ihsan that everything must do ihsan, but that ihsan must be present in everything. So when you explore it that way now, which is the second way, is that there's a certain level of ihsan in all actions. So the first point is you must have an ihsan mindset when you come to do deeds in general. Shouldn't be a bare minimum one, or you most likely won't make it. So that's why it could be an obligation. The second meaning is, in every separate obligation, there's actually some ihsan that is obligatory. Because all actions that you do, the majority of them, they don't get the default configuration. There's always like a wrench in the system. Something changes it up, right? For example, you want to have good manners, but then someone's really annoying. Now, you can have the bare minimum. You could go by the bare minimum, where it's like, okay, what is the bare minimum of husn al-khuluq that I want to show this person? But because they're a little bit annoying, or very annoying, that bare minimum will most likely falter if that's what you're aiming for. So you must go a little bit beyond it. Only with this person. So that's what ihsan must you do here, is that when you encounter this person, you up your manners a little bit more. But with everyone else, the default works. Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, please, thank you, you look nice. And it's all fine and dandy. You don't need to do anything beyond the bare minimum. It's so easy. But when this person comes in, well, I shouldn't point at anybody so they don't think that. So when that person comes in, it's like that won't work and you will falter. And now you'll say something or react in a way that's haram. So you can no longer go by the bare minimum. You must have a little bit ihsan and up the dial a little bit. Make sense? So this is a level that would be obligatory, even though what Allah ordained was a bare minimum that you could find elsewhere that would have worked in any other situation. So we have the Prophet ﷺ has emphasis on isbagh al-wudu, for you to deeply make wudu, to thoroughly make wudu. And in their climate, it makes a lot of sense. Where it's very dry, where the water is limited, you better make sure everything is wet to the best of your ability. So in our context, of course, where we have tons of water and it's always flowing, it's not really the same context. But why would he emphasize on isbagh al-wudu so much? Is because it's easy not to make proper wudu in that context. Limited water, very dry, where even in modern day where you have the AC running and the fans, you always get to your foot and you're not sure if you washed your head because it dried already. It's just like, wait a second. Here you do this, you're like, oh, it's still wet, I'm good. Over there you do that, you're like, I have no idea where I'm at, right? Like what part of the wudu I'm at. So, anybody else relate who's been there? No, it's just me? All right. Whatever. So, everything is going to have some level of ihsan that must be present in certain situations just to make sure that you don't fall beyond the bare minimum. Because the alternative is you're going to dip below the bare minimum if you don't do ihsan here. Because of that configuration, that situation. So every action that you explore in Islam, you'll see a bare minimum and then an ihsan component. And that ihsan component must be explored sometimes in the face of certain situations. That's what another interpretation of it. Yeah?
Was that example for bullet point 2 or 1?
Like I said, they kind of overlap. Because the general ihsan mindset would, I'm saying like your approach to life in general should be one of, I want to show Allah excellence. That's number one. Number two is, in specific deeds, you will find that you have to raise the bar to ihsan to avoid haram. So it's beyond the bare minimum, just to avoid haram. So for example, when we come to all the categories of Islamic actions, we have, for example, obedience to parents, birrul walidain. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded ihsan in it as almost as the benchmark, the bare minimum. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. So the ihsan was the benchmark almost as if it's the bare minimum. So when you get older, for example, as an adult, the scholars will mention, based on different evidences, at what level, to what degree, to what extent must you obey your parents. And we're not going to get into it now. Maybe another talk we can break it down in detail, because I'm sure it will lead to a lot of questions and discussions. But basically, when your parents have a benefit, when they are avoiding a harm, or when you will benefit or you will avoid a harm, all these things are taken into consideration. And once they all check out, it's more likely that it is an obligation that you must listen to them and you must follow what they say. This system is not as visited as much for children because you're under their authority and you must obey them. That's pretty much the blanket unless it's haram or unreasonable. But once they get older, the scholars differ just because parents naturally see this as their kid forever. But this person could be an adult, have their own home, have different obligations, and now these things clash now. Obeying my parents versus these other obligations and whatnot. So the scholars have said that all of this must be looked at once now, in this situation, where there's clashing obligations, where there's difficulty and separate lives, and things that are looked at are, does the parent benefit? Is the parent harmed? Does the child benefit? Is the child harmed? In addition to the original things that we mentioned, is it reasonable? And is it in line with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? But we could break that down a different time. My point in all of this is someone could do that and say, okay, I'll obey them. And they obey them like a robot. Their mom or dad needs this and they just do it. Here you go. Did they fulfill the command? I mean, they fulfilled their parents' command. Get me that. They did it, right? But if they just do it, here you go, and say, hey, I fulfilled your command, would that be reasonable? Or must you do it with pleasant demeanor, even if they didn't ask? Like you can't put something in a rude way. And even if you put it nicely, there's some level of smile or anything else I can get you. If you didn't do that and they considered it rude, and they said, what's wrong with you? What's with your attitude? And you say, you didn't ask, who's at fault here? You are. It's ihsan to your parents. No one can say, well, it's not, they didn't request it, they didn't tell me to smile. This is ihsan, it goes without saying. It's an obligation. But did they command me to do it? No. So it's not the bare minimum. You see what's happening here? So you must go up and beyond with your parents. Allah said so. This is ihsan that is obligatory. Even though you could technically argue, well, they didn't command it, I fulfilled what they wanted, everyone's happy, what's the problem? No, you have to do ihsan. If that means doing it with a smile, if that means putting it down a little bit gentler, if that means going back and filling in again or whatever it is, ihsan there's a level of it that's obligatory, that you must do here. And what is the height of ihsan here now? How can you go even beyond that of doing it with a smile in the most pleasant way, and how can you go even higher for parents? Kiss them? So that's nice, but that's not what Amar? So doing it without them asking. So the pleasantries that you include, that's part of ihsan. kissing them, hugging them, being nice, the nice words. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm saying, what's the level even above doing things pleasantly that they want, that they command, is doing it before they command. Going up and beyond to go ahead, like, I want you to do these 5 things. Done. They're actually done because I knew you wanted them. That's ihsan. That's the highest level of ihsan towards our parents. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who show them ihsan. Allahumma ameen. We already mentioned the example of husn al-khuluq. Now we have ties of kinship, right? So for you to keep the ties of kinship, the bare minimum, and culture has a say here, but the bare minimum is that you try to keep ties with family members. And whatever your culture dictates, whether it's just on Eid, or those who are closer, you see them once a month, whatever your culture sets up, you keep the ties of kinship. At the very least, if there's no regular meetings that you do, even if it's according to your culture, that there's no bad blood between you. You say, hey, you're good and everything, even if you don't see each other regularly. So that's the bare minimum. You must do that. To have good relations with each other is a must. It's an obligation. What is ihsan here now? No? What's ihsan? The Prophet ﷺ here, he directly said it. When Abu Hurairah complained to him, yeah. So cut ties of kinship, that's not ihsan, that's an obligation. If you cut ties, you're now sinning. If you say, I will not talk to this person anymore, I will not check on them, I don't want to hear about them, you are now sinful. I will not reach out to them. So that's the bare minimum. What is ihsan, Umar? Regardless if they reciprocate it or not. You invite them for Eid, you send them a gift, they say get lost. Your dad stole our land back in Egypt or whatever. It has nothing to do with you, but we're going to continue that. You say, hey, it's cool. I'm going to send you Eid Mubarak next Eid as well. I'm going to send you flowers. That doesn't matter. I'm not going to wait for it to be reciprocated. Its reciprocation is not a condition if I offer or not. That's ihsan, and there's a level of it that's obligatory. Because if they were to reciprocate that to you and say, well, I'm done with you, now you're sinful. So you may not have to go up and beyond and say, you know what, I'm going to send you a whole carton of gifts, but you're not allowed to cut them off at that point, and that takes patience. And to continue showing them the good treatment is the ihsan that you must do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to us in sadaqah. So what's the bare minimum of sadaqah? Zakah. There's nothing obligatory above zakah. After zakah now, we know there's a lot of ihsan that you could do. But even within the zakah now, because remember we said there's a level that's obligatory. So all sadaqah is extra. Anything beyond the zakah that you owe. But what's the level of zakah, of ihsan that you must have in zakah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that don't ruin it with men and adha. Men is showing someone your favor. Like, hey, I did this for you. Don't ever mention it. And adha is harm. Like, to put them down, for example. To use them for a favor. To say, hey man, I gave you zakah. Which doesn't give you ownership over me. Doesn't give you any type of right over the person. In fact, you gave them their right. That portion of wealth that you had, once the hawl passes, the Islamic lunar year passes on it, it's no longer your property. In Islamic fiqh books, you'll see that the government can come seize it. Like, this isn't yours. It belongs to the poor people. It's their property once the hawl passes on it. You choose to give it or not is up to you for you to earn the reward or not. So, don't ruin the sadaqah you gave it. Here's the zakah. Give the person, say, here's my zakah. Did you fulfill the obligation? If you go to the person and say, here's my zakah of the year, did you fulfill your obligation with Allah? Who says yes? You did, right? You have to pay this amount, you gave it. Did you do it with ihsan? Because now the person's like, thanks for your zakah. Like, is that what you're supposed to do? It's like those YouTube videos where they're like, hey man, I'm going to bless your day today. Turn off the camera, get them a meal, go home, make istighfar, and go get lost. I mean, what kind of attitude is this? It's so antithetical to sincerity, to faith, to everything that we're talking about. So, to do it with ihsan, the obligation could be fulfilled without it, but it's still obligatory. Because if someone said that purposefully and the other person felt bad, they would be sinful. Even though the bare minimum of zakah had been fulfilled by them giving it to them. So, there's a level of ihsan that's obligatory in every single thing, and you see it when you break down the action, especially when you're challenged in a hard time where the action can't be performed in its default or with its default settings that you're used to. Now to continue the hadith, the last part of it. So if you kill in a good manner. إِذَا قَتَلْتُمْ فَأَحْسَنُوا الْقِتْلَةِ. If you kill in a good manner. That took a weird turn, right? What's up with that? Why is killing being mentioned here? Yes, Yara? So, it's not something that you'd expect ihsan has a manifestation in. So, someone may ask, isn't it ihsan not to kill at all? Wouldn't actual ihsan be no killing ever? Yeah.
Perhaps this is talking about torture, so you can't torture if you're going to kill
But I'm saying, wouldn't ihsan, perfection, excellence be no killing at all? Forget tortures, no killing. So we took the hadith, right guys? When can life be, when does the sanctity of life get violated? In a way that is conducive with the sharia, where it's not a violation, where it's not haram. So the zabiha is coming, that's the rest of the hadith. But he says two separate statements. When you kill, show ihsan in the killing, and then the zabiha part is coming. So it's not talking about the zabiha here, it's talking about people. So that's what we took already. Remember with the last classes, at face value, someone would be like, what is going on here? But then we took the other hadith. We're saying that blood cannot be spilled except in a lawful manner. And here's the lawful matters: capital punishment, warfare, and so on and so forth. Outside of that, there is no lawful spilling of blood. And the person, whether the blood that they spilled is Muslim or not, they are going to be liable for questioning and punishment in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we already spoke about legitimate loss of life in terms of capital punishment and warfare. So now it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet is telling us, have ihsan even then. Even in legitimate capital punishment or warfare, if the goal is to extinguish life, to kill, ihsan still has a role to play. Why? Because when you talk about neighbors and parents and manners, be excellent and do your best there, everyone's like, duh, like it's a topic that you should be good in. But now when it comes to this, someone might be in a war and might think, how can I inflict as much pain as possible? Or, capital punishment now, a serial killer gets captured, killed 20 people. And they say, no, we can't just execute him, gotta torture him. Don't people think like that? All the time. They think that it's not right that this person will just get executed. Or a tyrant of a country. Let's say a tyrant gets capital punishment done on them. Everyone will say, it's not fair after all they've done. That's in the hereafter. Here, we don't have the authority to do anything besides what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us. How we feel is irrelevant. Right, with the hadith that we just covered now after Isha, where the man, the Prophet ﷺ, he was threatening the Prophet ﷺ with the sword when the tables were turned, he would have been justifiably killed. And it's you're about to kill me and the tables have been turned. But the Prophet ﷺ showed him ihsan, and it's even manifest here in warfare. That the character of the Prophet ﷺ manifests here because it's a holistic system. Ihsan is in everything. That's how the hadith began. Even in this. How do we have ihsan in this case? So you mentioned Umar, for example, there's no torture. The Prophet ﷺ forbid torture. He forbid killing with fire. He forbid mutilation. When he sent out an army, he told them, ﷺ, لا تغدروا ولا تغلوا ولا تمثلوا ولا تقتلوا الولدان ولا أصحاب الصوامع. Do not betray oaths that you have with people. Don't go in this town and make like a treaty with them and then betray them. You're not allowed to do that. Don't go to extremes. Don't mutilate bodies. Don't kill elderly. And do not kill monks who are worshipping in their monasteries. And the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was followed by Abu Bakr, where he would do the same thing, and he would famously give them these 10 conditions which have a lot of overlap. He would say, لا تخونوا, which means do not betray. ولا تغلوا, do not go to extremes. ولا تغدروا, do not, also it's similar to the betrayal. ولا تمثلوا, do not mutilate. ولا تقتلوا طفلا صغيرا, do not kill a small child. ولا شيخا كبيرا, or an old person. ولا امرأة, or a woman. ولا تعقروا نخلا ولا تحرقوه, do not uproot plants, do not uproot trees, palm trees, or burn them. Do not cut them down if they bear fruit. ولا تذبحوا شاة ولا بقرة ولا بعيرا إلا لمأكلة, and do not kill a cow or a sheep or a camel except if you're going to eat it. Don't raise people's farm, no scorched earth policy, right? He's telling them very, very clearly this is how you have ihsan even in warfare. And he said you will come across a people who you will find isolated in their worship in certain areas, monasteries or caves or whatever. Leave them to what they isolated themselves to. Don't bother them, let them be. This has nothing to do with why you're going out or what you're doing. So it could be very obvious to people that ihsan belongs in righteous actions, but in warfare they may not think, especially when they're faced with loss, especially when they're emotionally connected, which is normal. It's the human condition. Where now they want to inflict vengeance upon others in their pain, in their suffering, and that's not allowed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's not allowed. It's not something that we were meant to do. That this was only prescribed for a greater good, and that greater good is not personal gain or personal appeasement of our emotions. The Prophet ﷺ was out in a battlefield once, and he saw a group of people gathering somewhere. He said, "What are they gathering? Someone go check for me." And they said they're gathering around a woman who was killed. So he went there and he rebuked them. He said, "This is not, whoever did this is not something you're supposed to do, even if she was in the midst of them." Right, as long as she was not actively fighting, if she was in their midst. And he said, لا يقتلن أحدكم امرأة ولا عسيفا. None of you should ever kill a female, even if she's in the battlefield, or a employee. Asif is like an employee, it's probably not the best translation, but it's someone who was hired. So they'd hire people to carry their animals, to carry their stuff, or lead their animals, or feed their animals. He's not a combatant, he has no weapons, but he's there in the front lines because he's taking care of the animals. He said those people must be left alone, they cannot be killed, they cannot be attacked. We have in capital punishment as well. Remember when we spoke about capital punishment a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, where the situations where our capital punishment, what were they again? الثيب الزاني, which is the fornicator after, the adulterer after marriage, or after marriage, you could just say. Anything else? النفس بالنفس, a soul for a soul, the murderer. And then the murtad, those that leave their deen, leave the community. Those are the three that are mentioned in that one hadith. So in this condition, in this situation, the story of Al-Ghamidiyya, the one that we heard before, which is the woman from the Ghamidi tribe who committed zina, she goes up to the Prophet ﷺ and she confesses 3 times. He tries to send her away each time. On the 4th, she refuses and says, "I'm not leaving," the way that you tried to send away Ma'az, someone else who had a similar situation with the Prophet ﷺ. And then when she told him she was pregnant, he told her, "Go back until you give birth." She comes 9 months later with this child. He says, "Go back until he can eat solid food." She comes back 2 years later when he's eating solid food, and then the capital punishment is implemented on her. As it's being implemented, the stoning, there is some blood that comes on Khalid ibn Walid, and he's throwing very vigorously. He's throwing with extreme prejudice, you could say, extreme anger. And he is using also very derogatory language, saying you're a cursed person, you're an evil person, you're horrible. So the Prophet sees him doing that, he says, "Mahlan ya Khalid, stop it. Don't do that, Khalid. فوالذي نفسي بيده لقد تابت توبة لو تابها صاحب مكس or صاحب مكس لغفر له. And another narration he said, if لو قسمت بين 70 من أهل المدينة لوسعتهم. He says, don't do that, Khalid. Don't throw so prejudice and with extreme hatred. Don't use the derogatory terms that you're using, and don't say that she's cursed. For I swear by Allah that she has repented and been forgiven. Such a repentance that if it was given to the Sahib al-Mix is like somebody who is if you translate it directly, it'll say tax collector, which is very interesting. But it's not just a tax collector, because of course it could be legitimate taxes, but it's somebody who goes around makes extortion. That's the right word, extortion. Go around to people and saying, "Hey, it's a nice stall you got there in this marketplace. It'll be a shame if caught on fire randomly in the middle of the night," and the person's like, "Oh my God, here, please don't do that." Yeah, because this is my corner of the marketplace and I oversee security like the mafia. There's places that have been doing that all throughout history, right? So that is such an extreme sin because of the dhulm that it does to people, because of the oppression that it spreads, and so on and so forth. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, if her tawbah was given to someone like that, it would forgive him. Which shows us, one, how huge her tawbah is and how huge that sin is. In another hadith, even greater, he says, if her tawbah was taken up and divided into 70 households of Medina, not even 70 people, 70 households, it would have been more than enough to forgive all of them. There would have been some to spare. She's not an evil woman. She's not someone who should be condemned. She's not somebody who should look at negatively. And subhanAllah, like you just think of that just from by default. If someone came and shared this story with you, you'd have such a negative perception of them, not being aware of the fact that they could rise so much higher than you. That through this sin, they could earn the mercy and forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond several lifetimes and several households. And I remember once one of my teachers was saying this story, and he stops and he goes, "I wish I was her." SubhanAllah, like you just think like, wait, why? It's not a good description. Well, she was forgiven. Do you have that guarantee? Do I have that guarantee? She has it from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only for her, but for it's greater than 70 households worth of forgiveness. And he says that's it. That's what you'd love to have in your lifetime. That stamp of approval. She won. She's for sure 100% good in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while me and you are still up for grabs. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us safe passage. Allahumma ameen. But anyway, the point of the hadith, bringing it up, is we're going to have ihsan here. And what you're doing is not ihsan, Khalid. What you're doing to this woman is not ihsan. This is not something that is permissible in this regard, because even in this case we must have ihsan. So when you go through the Islamic rules of engagement in warfare, there's more. We don't have the time to go over all of it, of course. It's not an Islamic military college, but it's mind-boggling that you see the number of rulings and things that would make warfare harder, especially in modern day. It makes warfare much harder. Why? Because you have to do with ihsan. That the first thing that will be asked about on the Day of Judgment is أول ما يقضى بين الناس يوم القيامة الدم, unlawful blood that was spilled. That each person will come to the other and he'll say, "Oh Allah, ask him, why did he kill me? Why did he cut my life short?" It's not a game, it's not a joke. It's not, even in warfare, you have to be very, very careful. Khalid ibn Walid killed somebody. Usama ibn Zayd killed somebody. And the Prophet ﷺ disapproved. There are situations where he said, you shouldn't have done that. And then he said very strong statements. He said, "Oh Allah, I have nothing to do with this. They'll answer for you on the Day of Judgment. It wasn't by my command." In one situation, Usama ibn Zayd is fighting with someone. And as they're fighting, mid-sword fight, the other guy sees Usama and says, "You know what? I'm not going to win this." So he drops his sword. And he says, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah." And Usama kills him. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Why would you do that after he said the shahada?" He said he saw that he was going to lose. He was just trying to... And he said, "Did you open his chest and read his heart? Can you unequivocally say that with 100% guarantee? If you cannot, then have nothing to do with this. This is between you and Allah. That's not what I taught you. Right? This isn't what Islam teaches us." Imagine a situation where the opposing army can always just say the shahada and you're forced. Of course, the Muslims are not foolish about it, but imagine if that's like something that you should consider. It must be considered if it's truthful or not. Someone who's coming to surrender, or if that's where... And it has happened in our history, even from the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself, where a group of people, they accept Islam immediately and they're granted amnesty. Or even if they don't accept Islam immediately, they plead for amnesty and they're granted it by the Prophet ﷺ, despite it being an active warfare situation. Why? Again, because we don't fight, even in fighting. We don't fight warfare as a Muslim except with ihsan. Thinking about, oh, these principles don't disappear is what he wants to tell us. These principles don't disappear when it becomes difficult, or when it becomes difficult to place them or unsure. They're still there and you still must have ihsan. Go ahead, Umar, and we'll finish the last part now very quickly about the biha.
I'll tell you what's the opposite of that. Clicking buttons from far away and just killing random people.
Killing tens of thousands of people at a click of a button like a video game from miles away is the opposite of ihsan. That's true. The opposite of ihsan is what every single nation on the face of the earth has done in their warfare ever until today. And not that Islamic history is perfect, but the teachings that Islam gave us in regards to warfare, as implemented by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself and his companions, that is the ceiling of ihsan, even in warfare. And then everything afterwards is usually leaning towards the other direction, as human nature is without revelation. Next, he said, if you're going to let one of you sharpen his knife, and if you slaughter, meaning a dhabiha, an animal now, then perfect your slaughter and let each one of you sharpen his knife and put his slaughter to rest. Make it comfortable. And this is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ again, where he, for example, came across a man and he was standing with his foot on the back of a sheep, on the neck of a sheep, keeping it down, and he's sharpening his knife. He's going like this. And it's looking up at him. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "What are you doing? أَفَلَا قَبْلَ هَذَا?" You thought to sharpen it now, like you couldn't sharpen it before you got to this position while it's looking at you? You should have sharpened it earlier. أَوَ تُرِيدُ أَن تُمِيتَهَا مَوْتَاتٍ? Do you want to kill it several times? You want to kill it 10 times? Like not just that final cut you're going to do, but once when you're cutting it, then when you're dragging out, how many times are you going to kill it? Bringing it to this point of fear and absolute anxiety. Like, what are you doing? Put everything aside earlier, come and it's one and done, right? Don't leave it in this situation for long. He's rebuking him. We also have the hadith where Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an al-mujaththama. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbid for people to tie down animals. And if he found out an animal was tied down and then slaughtered, he would forbid anyone to eat from it. It's no longer halal to eat from, because you left it tied down and tortured. What does that have to do? What do we say about the animal industry now? No comment. Yes, free range chickens only. So we'll have to look at the exact definition from al-mujaththama. From what I understood, and we'll have to double check, it's something that is completely tied down, like from all directions. Like it's, because you could put a leash on it and tie it to a structure, for example, So just tying its feet, it shouldn't be an issue. But the al-mujathama was something that was specifically that was anchored down. So they'd use it for like animals that tried to run or that were wild. So it'd get anchored down from each leg and then its neck maybe. So it's like imprisoned. So we'll double check, but inshallah, it shouldn't be an issue just to tie, let's say, one leg or something so it doesn't run, or so that while the dhabih is going on, it doesn't go wild.
Actually, tie all legs together.
All the legs together. And while you're doing the dhabih, they tie all the legs together, they put it down. Allah Alam should be fine. This seems to be something that is tied down all the time as almost like an imprisonment. But we'll double check, inshallah. Please do remind me. Jazakallah khairan. To what extent it can or cannot be tied down. Wagyu only?
No, because they tie down the baby cows so that they don't develop muscle. And then
That seems exactly what's being spoken about, yeah. I don't know that's what Wagyu is. I'm not up there. Yeah, I don't eat Wagyu. Who do you think I am? No, I'm joking. I know that. So that seems to be what's being talked about. Something that's tied down in such a restrictive, imprisoning fashion that would torture the animal, as opposed to so it doesn't run or it doesn't escape.
That means what? Eating that is
If that's how Wagyu is tied down, it could be, yeah. I'm not giving you that fatwa yet. I didn't taste it yet, so we'll ask after you take me out to Wagyu. We have the hadith where he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا تتخذوا شيئا فيه روح غرضا. Don't take something that has a soul as a target. Can't target practice with living thing. That means game hunting is haram. You can hunt to eat or to benefit. Any other reason is haram. To shoot a living thing or to harm it without the intention of benefiting from it or protecting from its harm. And you know, this is something that must be revisited. The game hunting industry, meaning hunting for pure sport, for fun, for trophies, is a $1.5 billion industry, and climbing. You know, they had Olympic pigeon shooting in 1900. It's like 125 years ago. It was the only time that they ever had it, where it was an Olympic event to shoot live pigeons. But the Prophet ﷺ forbid this. You will see in our deen, in books of fiqh, hundreds of years ago, they were debating on cooking things like lobster and crab alive. Why are they debating it? Because they said, does it get tortured? Does it get tortured in this situation? How can you kill it? Because there's no dhabh of these things, right? They don't have the flowing blood the way that other animals do. They don't have a neck, and it doesn't work the same way. So people have always been cooking them alive. I know they kill it initially, yeah.
What about like overpopulation? The deers, the bears, like Central America?
So that's harm. If there's some serious harm to the human population, then but their parts should still be benefited with. It shouldn't be game hunting. Like I'm hunting so I can have a bear head up on top of my mantelpiece, my fireplace, because it looks, that's 100% haram, or a bear throw rug. But if it's something like that's clear harm to people, then it could be permitted, depending on the context, inshallah. So they debated this hundreds of years ago because they said you're not allowed to torture creatures. So if this method tortures them, they must be killed beforehand in whatever method that's possible. If we don't have the ability to do dhabiha because it's not that kind of animal, we figured it out. Why did they bother debating this? Because they knew that they must have ihsan, and that a woman entered the hellfire because of a cat that she used to starve. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about her and he said that. And that another woman, in fact a prostitute, entered Jannah because she gave water to a thirsty dog that was on the verge of death. So they knew how consequential that ihsan to animals was, and the lack of it, how dangerous that was. So they explored all these concepts for hundreds of years, trying to find how can we have ihsan in everything. The last thing I want to say is that, what is the ceiling? There is none. There is no ceiling for ihsan. How far do you want it to go? It was narrated about Aisha and a few others that they would perfume the silver coins in their home before they go give it out in sadaqah, so that the poor people can smell it and it smells pleasant. That's how far they were thinking. Some of them, when they'd go give out sadaqah, they wouldn't give it out like this. They'd give it out like this. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that the higher, al-yad al-ulya khayru min al-yad al-sufla. The hand that's on top is better than the hand that's on the bottom. What does the hadith mean? It's not about the position of your hand. Giving is better than taking. Jazakallah khairan. For you to be a giver is better than being a taker. Sometimes it's not in your control, but if it's in your control, be a giver, don't be a taker. That's what the hadith means. But they said, they were thinking of ihsan. So they said, I don't want the poor person to feel like I'm giving them. So it's like here, humbling themselves. Like they just, again, it had no ceiling. So they thought, how can I do ihsan in everything. And that leads us to the question right now, are we individuals? Are we an ummah of ihsan? Or are we an ummah of Muslim standard time? It's like everyone just accepts that everything's 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes late. Is that ihsan? To be known for that? To like wear it with pride? Like we go late to everything, we start everything late? It's completely antithetical to ihsan. It's nothing we should be proud of. Are we people who are known that if you hire someone of this deen, they will do something with ihsan, or you'll think twice before you hire a Muslim, even as a Muslim yourself? Are we people who perpetuate these things because of what we do? Because we could say, oh, these are all just things people say and they're not really there, or we could be perpetuating them with our action and not even know it. That's not an ummah of ihsan. That's not manifestations of ihsan. That's not itqan. That's not living this paradigm where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote ihsan in everything. It belongs in everything. It should show in your clothing, in your actions, in your inaction, in your speech, in your silence, in how you smell, in how you manage your time, how you manage your wealth. It would be ideal that you have this all written in categories, and how can I have ihsan in them? Examples from the sunnah: ihsan in my wealth, ihsan in my demeanor with others, ihsan in my worship. And then you just go down the list, always seeking ihsan, as opposed to what many of us get stuck in, a rut of always seeking the bare minimum. The scholars, they mention, how do you think the Sahaba reacted after a hadith like this? The city was probably in a buzz, where people would go about hearing these hadith and then running to say, how can I have ihsan in everything? And that's the kind of attitude that will get you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now. So remember, we spoke about the judgment, you doing the bare minimum. The opposite of that spectrum is you get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you tried your absolute best. You had this mindset. Guess what? You failed bunches of times anyway, because you're a human being. You fell short anyway, and you faltered because you have shortcomings that were part of your design. But when you get there, you're treated with ihsan now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you did ihsan on your level as a human being, as small as it was. وَهَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Is there compensation for ihsan except ihsan from Allah? So you tried your best. Your best was this, because you're a human. That's fine. He didn't expect more of you. But now He will do ihsan to you, which is لا خوف عليكم ولا أنتم تحزنون ويدخلوا الجنة. That's it, it's yours. So this is the paradigm and the outlook and the approach that will allow us to fare through these things successfully, the acts of worship, the challenges in life, and all the things that we're learning. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people of ihsan and to allow us to implement ihsan in everything. Any questions, comments, feedback? Go ahead, Am.